So we've spent a lot of time talking about what evolution is and how it occurs. But is there support for the theory of evolution? Well, it turns out that because we're calling evolution a theory, there has to be a lot of support for it, because by definition, a theory is something that has been supported by a wide body of evidence. So evidence for evolution comes from a wide variety of sources. We can directly observe evolution happening. We can look at the fossil record. We can look at similar traits among related organisms, and we can look at biogeography, which is where organisms are located on Earth. So oftentimes people think that evolution can't be observed because of the misconception that evolution has to happen over long periods of time and that evolution has to encompass the creation of new species. But actually, evolution can be observed and has been observed on many different circumstances, many different situations. So we can directly observe evolution happening. Our book uses two examples here. One is MRSA, which is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. This is a bacteria that has gained antibiotic resistance in a hospital situation. And if you would like to read about that, it's super interesting study piece of information that supports evolution. The example that I'm going to go over is the example of soapberry bugs. So soapberry bugs are insects that are found in Florida, and researchers wanted to know if the introduction of a different food source might have had an effect on these soapberry bugs. So they wanted to look at whether or not natural selection had occurred in response to this new food source. So these soapberry bugs have long needle-like mouth parts that they can use to bore into fruit. And their native food source are the seeds of a type of fruit called the balloon vine. Now, this balloon vine has fruit that's very large. They need long mouth parts to drill into that fruit to get at the seeds. But they thought that an introduced species, the golden rain tree, which has fruit that is flatter and seeds that are not as deep, may have had an effect on these mouth parts of the soapberry bugs. And so researchers looked at the impact of this introduction. So on the left, we have the balloon vine. You can see that it is a big round fruit. I'm sure you can see where it gets its name. And then on the other side, on the right-hand side, we see the golden rain tree fruit. So these are golden fruits that look a lot like raindrops. And you can see that they have a much different shape. Down there on the bottom is a soapberry bug that is drilling into a balloon vine fruit. So researchers designed this experiment to look at how and if mouth parts have changed on the soapberry bug over time. And so they took 3 different measurements. They took measurements of soapberry bugs that are still feeding on their native balloon vine food source in southern Florida. And they measured the beak length or the mouth part length of species that were feeding on the golden rain tree in central Florida where it was introduced. And then they also looked at museum specimens to see historically what the mouth parts were like on these soapberry bugs. And so they found that the soapberry bugs that were feeding on those native balloon vines tended to have longer mouth parts than the ones that were feeding on the golden rain tree. They also found that historically in museum specimens, the length of the beak is more similar to the mouth parts on the native species. Now, this suggested that in response to natural selection, to this introduced new food source, that the mouth parts, the shape of those soapberry bugs' mouthparts had decreased in length in conjunction with that golden rain tree introduction. So researchers concluded that natural selection for this new food source was able to alter the shape of the mouthparts of the population of these soapberry bugs. So there are several different examples in your textbook. As we go through, if you go back to your textbook and look for the explanations of the different definitions, there's all kinds of examples of microevolution happening to populations. We can also observe evolution happening by artificial selection. So artificial selection is when humans introduce a pressure onto a species to make them what they need them to be. In other words, humans are selecting the traits and selectively breeding them in a population in order to get the desired traits. Now, we've done this with a whole bunch of things. Almost all of our agricultural foods, livestock, things like that, have all been artificially selected for the traits that we want. So our book goes through this example of the wild mustard plant that has been selected in different ways for a variety of different vegetables that we now eat. So, for example, kale is related to wild mustard, but it is selected for the leaves. Cabbage is selected for a different type of bud on the flower from the original mustard plant. Broccoli is a different selection for flowers and stems, and so on. Over here we've got corn. This is native corn, and this is the sort of progression of corn into our modern corn by humans selecting for the traits they want. A couple of animal examples. We've got all of our variety of dog breeds that are related to the wild wolf. So each of these breeds has been selected for particular traits to develop the type of dog that individuals were interested in, whether it was a working dog or a companion dog, whatever it may be. And then, of course, any of our livestock animals have been selected as well. So it might be cattle for meat, it might be cattle for dairy, and they're all selected for different traits. So artificial selection is a very similar process to natural selection in that the individuals with the traits that are advantageous, we are choosing what's advantageous, the ones that we want. But the individuals that have those traits that we want are selectively bred to increase that trait in the population. We also see evidence for evolution in the fossil record. So the fossil record is really important because it shows widespread patterns of evolution, widespread changes. It shows when species as a whole were relatively abundant. It shows extinctions. But as far as evolution has occurred, the fossil record shows similarities and differences between past and present organisms. In other words, it shows us Darwin's descent with modification. It shows us that there are characteristics that are similar from these previous organisms that lived on Earth to the ones that are living on Earth now. But it also shows us that organisms are different depending on the time that they were alive on Earth, depending on the environment that surrounded them and the specific environmental pressures. The fossil record also shows us that organisms have become extinct and that new species have come about, new and unique species have come about. Now, this shows us that there are sometimes organisms who are not perfectly suited for their environment and whose populations have not been able to acquire the adaptations needed to be able to survive. Now, sometimes this is a cataclysmic event, like the extinction of the dinosaurs. There are multiple extinctions throughout the history of the Earth, but there are also background extinctions where organisms are becoming extinct at sort of a regular rate. And so we can see that in our fossil record. The fossil record also allows us to trace evolutionary changes in various groups of organisms. So up here on the top right, I have a couple of hominid fossils. Hominids are human-like organisms, human ancestors. And by studying fossils, we can look at how similar organisms that we assume to be related based on similar characteristics, have changed over time. So we're not just looking at development of new species, but we're looking at how groups can change. And the fossil record can give us a long-term history of how those changes might have occurred. Fossils can also give us a time frame for extinctions, for important events for our planet, and fossils can give us this information in a couple of ways. Fossils that are found lower in the strata is just the levels of sediment that are found in an area. Fossils that are lower are going to be your older fossils, and younger fossils are going to be more towards the top. And so you can use that to determine what types of organisms were alive at the same time. You can look at what types of organisms were predominant at different time frames, and you can also look at a time frame for when different types of traits were appearing. You can also do different types of dating on fossils, so radiometric dating, other types of dating that will give you a particular time frame for when certain organisms were alive and when certain fossils were laid down. So fossils can also tell us about lineages, so how organisms have changed over time. So our book uses this example of the evolution of cetaceans. So cetaceans are whales and dolphins, and whales and dolphins are thought to be related to ungulates, such as deer. And this is based on fossil record of the ankle bone in ungulates compared to cetaceans. So this is the ankle bone that is representative of many mammals. And down here at the bottom, you see there's one little knob here. And if you look at your cetaceans and your ungulates, you'll notice that there's two ridges here instead of one knob. So along with some other shapes of the pelvis and limb bones, this ankle bone shows relatedness between these cetaceans and these even-toed ungulates. Now this tells us that it helps to define whether or not cetaceans evolved in the water or evolved from organisms that were living on land. Because the bone structure and the fossils that we have found related to that bone structure are similar, it would suggest that they are more closely related to organisms that were on land and moved into the sea. Another bit of evidence for evolution is homology. So homology is similar structures due to a common ancestor. In other words, related species have underlying characteristics, even if the structures that are similar are performing different functions. And this is strongly correlated with descent with modification. In other words, if we look at a group of related species, they're going to have many of their features in common, even if they have been modified. So homology can lead to homologous structures. So homologous structures are the specific characteristics that are present in our common ancestor. So here we have an example of limb and hand bones in different mammals. So we've got the human and the cat, and if you look there, they're actually quite similar. You can see the color coordinated bones. The humerus here is very similarly shaped. They're not identical because they have different functions. The radius, this orange bone here, is very similarly shaped, and the ulna is very similarly shaped. Now, again, they're not identical, but they still have similar functions, which is to be the front limb of a mammal. And then you've got the hand bones. They do look very similar, but of course they must be different because cats are walking on their front limbs and we are not. If we look at the whale, we see that this purple here and the orange, those look much, much different. Those would be modified humerus, radius, and then the ulna. But it's because the whale flipper, the front limb of a whale, has a vastly different function from our hands or the cat hands. And then we've got these greatly extended phalanges or finger bones here because that is their main mode of locomotion. Over here we've got the bat. Again, similar structures because it's a mammal, but modified for the specific function of that forelimb, which in this case is flying. So homology can give us some information about what common ancestors we had. And on the opposite direction, common ancestors can help to explain the similar bone structures or similar other types of characteristics that we might find in living organisms. Sometimes, though, we have common structures without common ancestry. In other words, we have structures or functions that appear many times, even though the common ancestor doesn't actually share that trait. In this case, we call this convergent evolution. So convergent evolution is when organisms who are not closely related, who do not share a close common ancestor with the trait, resemble one another. Now this occurs due to independent evolution, and it's usually different genes involved. And a different pathway of evolution to get there. So for example, we've got the sugar glider here. It's a marsupial from Australia, and we've got a flying squirrel from North America. Both of them have these flaps of skin connecting their forelimbs that allow them to glide between treetops. So in convergent evolution, you get similar features based on similar environment and similar selection pressures, not because of a common ancestor. So these guys both developed these flaps of skin because it is advantageous. It's a way to get around in their environment. But the close relatives of either one of these, for the flying squirrel is going to be other squirrels, other North American rodents. For the sugar glider, it's going to be Australian marsupials. So things like kangaroos and koalas are more closely related to the sugar glider than they are to the squirrel. So the common ancestor doesn't have the trait, but it develops due to similar pressures. There are many examples of this. When convergent evolution happens, it leads to analogous structures. So convergent evolution is when two types of organisms adapt to their similar environments in the same way. And this leads to analogous structures, which are the shared features. So they usually have a similar function or a similar requirement, which means they're going to have a similar shape. If we look at the pterodactyl and the bat, we have two very similar structures, but their closest common ancestors do not have wings. For example, the pterodactyl has a close common ancestor to a bird, but the bat is not closely related to either one of them. So the pterodactyl and bird wings are analogous to the bat wing. Similar structure, but similar functions, but from a different evolutionary function. Convergent evolution and homology can also apply to processes. So for example, C-force photosynthesis that we learned about in Chapter 7 actually developed independently by convergent evolution up to 40 times in different plant lineages. So these similar structures, similar functions can apply to processes as well as structures. Finally, we get to biogeography as evidence for evolution. So biogeography is the study of geographical distribution of species. Biogeography is really important because it tells us where current species are located, and it can also tell us how species have moved. So as these species were evolving over the long history of our planet, we've had changes in the physical structure of the planet. So continental drift has happened, changes in the makeup of the continents have happened, and this has led to specific species evolving in different locations. And also some quite unique examples of endemic species, which are species that are found nowhere else on Earth, although they might be related to others and just separated by the physical movement of the continents. So biogeography is really important because knowing where an organism comes from can tell you a lot about its evolutionary history. It can tell you how and when these organisms evolved. Did they evolve before or after a split between two land masses, or before or after two islands were connected or no longer connected? Biogeography can tell you about the native habitats of these organisms, which can give you clues to the types of characteristics that are going to be found in other organisms in that area. Because remember that organisms who are found together are probably going to be closely related. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you get species that don't make sense that they're there, and looking at the other species around it and looking at what other species might be closely related can give you some information into the history. Did they come at a different time? Did they evolve due to a unique set of pressures while other groups of organisms became extinct in the area? So biogeography can tell you a lot about what environmental factors may have led to the evolutionary pathway of these specific organisms that you're interested in.